Hello, welcome to another episode of Pickle's Garage. For my handful of subscribers, I'm sorry for the delay. I got a puppy and I had a couple car shows that came up, so been a little preoccupied, but I'm back at it now, as all of my cars always have something going on, which is the joy of working on them, right? So today we are doing something a little bit more straightforward, brakes. The only reason why this one might be a little bit more interesting is just because I ran into a unique problem, which I'll show you here in a second. So it might be a bigger issue, which I know it's you guys, you're probably wondering why I'd be excited about that, but at least it's something a little different than a regular brake job. So I'm going to start with the basic tools. I don't have the brake pads themselves yet, and the reason is because I want to kind of figure out if there's other issues that are going on here. But to start out, you're going to need a jack. I always like to have a jack stand as well, just for extra protection. A chunk of wood is usually good to protect your frame as well, but of course you can use your standard, scissor jack that comes with your car. You're also going to need something to get the lug nuts off, and then this tool isn't required. I actually bought it on Amazon probably a year and a half ago, thinking that it was going to be awesome, I was going to use it all the time, but I haven't yet. So basically what it does is it'll spread apart the calipers to make it easier to install. So you'll see that in action, and I'll give you a brief review on that as well. So let's get started with the problem. So obviously there's a lot of brake dust on the rim itself. My tire rims always seem to get kind of dirty, so I didn't think anything of it at first, but then obviously it escalated. And from there it started doing something that kind of resembled like I was dragging something. And what it was is, as you can see, the outer edge of the rotor itself is being worn away. And so I'm guessing that the pad itself either is just so low that it's eating into it, and maybe it just never had the installed metal piece that makes a squeaking sound when it starts to get low, because the brakes never seemed that bad. And none of the others were giving me any problems, and so it all kind of happened rather quickly. I'll probably have to replace this rotor. Honestly, that's a safer bet. It's really not carved in that much. Let me get it to focus. So I might be able to get away with not, but if I was recommending it to you, I would say to just replace it. But if you're on a budget or whatever, I don't see this as being something that is too severe. So let's see if there's an issue with the caliper itself that might be eating into it. But I'm going to go ahead and do the stuff that's not that interesting. I'm just going to loosen these. I'm going to raise it up. I'm going to make sure that my handbrake is on. I'm going to make sure that I chock that front wheel. And then I'm going to take these entirely off, take the rim itself off, and then you'll next see me with the rotor and the caliper exposed, and we'll see what issues we're working with here today. Alright, so here is our rotor. A hint, by the way, if you're having trouble getting the lug nuts off, just because maybe someone torqued it, too tight or something, if you get the bar kind of, let me just show you. If you get the bar kind of up like, ooh, help, my hand was the other way. Kind of like that, right? And then you just step on it, you can get more kind of torque on that. So if you're having trouble getting them off, that is what I would recommend. All right, so as mentioned, this is the rotor. If you haven't seen one before, it's really just a hunk of metal. It's vented here basically to keep it cool. It does have a lot of surface rust. Honestly, this was replaced a little while ago, and I think they did it poorly, which is probably why I'm having these issues. But this isn't alarming in itself. Naturally, a lot of people like kind of having clean rotors. So I could replace this as well, but this is just kind of like a cheap cast iron, and that's why it has a bunch of the surface rust, but nothing looks super alarming to me just on the surface. But just to kind of go over what we're looking at here, this is actually your brake line, right? And so it leads back here, and then this is actually a bleed valve. So if you had to bleed your brakes, that's kind of the port that you would work with. Get that snapped on there. That is the caliper itself. Looking at the brake here, I would say, yeah, it's just a standard super worn pad, because basically you'll see this kind of metal right here, Normally there's almost like a shelf, and that's the actual pad itself. The fact that this metal is actually sitting on the rotor itself just tells me that the pad is entirely gone. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this real quick. I'm gonna see if they just ever put the metal tab, or maybe my music's been too loud for too long or what. But odds are, if this one went and I did it all at the same time, I'm gonna have to replace all my pads. I don't know if I'll show you all of them, just because it does get really repetitive, obviously. But I'll go ahead and show you this one. So the very first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and pull this caliper itself off. You'll note again that it is gonna be connected to the brake line, so you do have to be careful that you don't like drop it, or you have a place to set it so it doesn't, you know, damage this or misplace it. You could probably loosen this up if you have a 2011 Camaro or similar, like me, to give you more kind of slack, which is probably what I'll do, because that's a pretty easy access there. But these, honestly, they're not really attached with a whole lot. They're usually just 2 bolts. I'm seeing one here and probably one down here. Yep, so I'll go ahead and remove those, and that will take it off this kind of spindle here, which is back here, and all this fun stuff is connected to. And then I should be able to just knock this off. So let me go ahead and loosen these, and I'll do my best to try and film the actual removal of it, just so you can kind of see how it goes. Yeah, all right, let me start on that. All right, so it kind of just fell off, which sometimes it does. Actually, I took off the pressure screws as well. So I already loosened up this one so that I could pull it down here. So here's the caliper itself. That's kind of the plunger there. And then this kind of holds the brake pads themselves together. It was actually these 2 bolts right here. There's one here and one here. So I was mentioning earlier a spindle, I can kind of get a better look at it. You'll notice it. I mean, it's the big, basically hunk of metal that you'll see a bunch of things attached to. That is going to be what your brake caliper is connected to. These smaller screws, which I pointed to earlier, they'll take stuff out, or they'll kind of take the pressure out on this itself, so that way it slides off of this caliper. And so that way I was able to access it. So here is the internal pad, because you'll have one on either side of the rotor. And as you can see, it is definitely getting close. That's that metal pin I was telling you about, where basically once you start braking, you'll start to hear a squeaking sound, and that kind of lets you know that you're nearing the end of your brake life. The other thing too is you'll see it's kind of worn unevenly, and so this might just either wasn't installed or just wasn't seated properly, so that's kind of an issue there. But you'll see what I was talking about, where there's this flat plate here and then kind of a ledge, and then the pad itself is right here. So you can tell how bad they are if you basically don't even see any sort of ledge, and you can tell how bad they are based on how much of this you have. And when I get the new ones, I'll show you that as well. But again, yeah, that's that metal piece that will start making sounds on you, and you'll be good to go to start getting new ones. Now, this is the exterior one. You'll notice there is no pad on this. This is in no way, shape, or form a brake pad anymore. This is doing nothing to stop me. So you could see where it was starting to actually eat into it again, off center, which is kind of funky. But that's what was scraping here, is as it was going around, it was just eating and rubbing these two metals together, probably making some sparks a little bit. Yeah, there was absolutely no metal pin on this, and so again, I could have been better about, you know, knowing it was at least worth checking to see if, you know, they had been done right, you know, whenever they were done. But yeah, so I will be replacing these, and I will be inspecting the others, but I'll probably just replace all of them. That's the best thing to do. Again, I know some people, you know, they're going to be on a budget, they only want to replace the ones that are bad, but your brakes all enact at the same time for the most part. And so if these are bad, then they're all bad. The only thing I can think of is maybe whoever had done these brakes cheaped out because one looked okay, or like a handful looked okay, so they just kept them. But in reality, you should just replace them all. That way you know. and you don't have to worry about it. So I'm gonna go ahead and run to the store real quick, get myself some brake pads. Again, this rotor, I really technically should replace it, but it's not eating too bad to be super concerning, so I'll probably just keep it. I don't really see that as warped or anything. I guarantee if I went to an auto, like Brake Masters or whatever, they would tell me to replace it, but obviously they're getting paid to do so. But honestly, I could tell it's rough, but I can't tell it's at any sort of different depth, so I don't think it's as bad as I thought it might be. So again, I'm just going to replace the pads, and I'll slap these back together. I'll show you some of the new ones, and we'll go from there. Oh, the other thing too is I didn't have my brake bar handy because it's in the trunk of another car. But if you don't so much care about your ratchets because it can break them, or at least you trust that, you know, it's going to withstand it, I would get a piece of pipe like this. You know, it can come from a broom, it can come from whatever you need it to come from, as long as it's hollow. And then basically you won't have to work as hard if you just put the ratchet in there. We call it a cheater in my family, and basically leverage. So you just hold that end, and it'll make it a lot easier to break some of these loose if they're on there super tight. The other thing is to remember, if you are going to break them off like this, you need to at least try and tighten them like this too, because if you didn't have the strength to break them off, then putting it back on, you want to make sure it's tight as well. So little trick again, it does break ratchets if they're either cheap or old or something. So either you don't care about the ratchet or you trust the hell out of its quality. So this one was a cheap one, so I didn't really care, but honestly it stood up really well, so happy with that. But let me get those pads. Okay, and we're back. So I went with the Duralast Gold because it came with hardware and they were out of the cheaper version. So I will say it is good to get the one with the hardware. They say it's recommended, and I know sometimes it's like, whatever, you know, it's 20 extra bucks for what, but the hardware is kind of important because you'll be able to look at your brace here, and these are cruddy. So it does come with a little diagram. It's a little vague, to be honest. You could probably work it out, but otherwise just look at what you have, look for something that looks old and decrepit, and replace it with the shiny new stuff. So one last look at how bad these pads were. This was the best one, the very best one, right? Okay, this is the new one. So let this be a reminder, if you just randomly happen to find this video and you weren't thinking about doing your brakes, that you should probably just do your brakes. So I'm gonna go ahead and start slapping these in. I'm gonna slap them into this, and so you can see the final product, and then that'll just, I think, make it easier to showcase what I'm doing here. But I'm gonna go ahead and take the old hardware off. You'll see this gross piece right here, and put the new shiny stuff on, and we'll go from there. All right, so we got old shims out, new shims in, and here is kind of the assembly. It's currently upside down, but basically it just holds the pads in place. So they'll look like that, and I'll put it back in the caliper itself. Go ahead and slide this on, and we'll start tightening stuff up. But technically that tool that I had, this one, it doesn't really work for this. I mean, it would if I need to push this, which maybe I still will. But basically you just slide this in between that, which doesn't even slide in anyways. But honestly, I've seen these work more with like older model stuff. So this is probably just, honestly, the way that this comes apart, I think they've gotten a lot more intelligent with how they design things. So I probably don't even need that tool for this job. I'll go ahead and try and slide this back in without it, and hopefully next scene you'll see it'll be all back on. All right, so I ate my words immediately. So this actually is pretty helpful. It's a little temperamental, just because it won't even crank unless there's any sort of pressure. I don't know how much I'm gonna be able to show you, but basically I just showed you a couple turns. So I'm gonna try and get this as close to here as possible, and then that'll make it easier to line everything up and then pump the brakes a few times. We should be in business. So honestly, not a bad tool. This one's cheap as hell, so if you find something similar to it but like actually good, I would recommend that. Unfortunately, I don't have the brand name of this one, but I'm sure it's pretty identifiable. All right, let me go ahead and finish compressing this. And then the other thing I wanted to notate, I don't know if it showed it very well in the first time that I did it, is this one is going to be against the caliper here. Right, like that, okay. And then the other one, this flat backed one, that's gonna be against here. So you don't wanna put two inboard ones and two outboard ones, or whatever, or have them in the wrong order. So just make sure you do that. So it won't fit right if you try and do it wrong. There's like a little bump, I think. Yeah, there's a little bump on these that should kind of push it out of the seat. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, now that I have this pushed all the way in, I'm gonna go ahead and slide this on and tighten it back up. I'll show you the final product. We'll be good to go. All right, so it started raining, so I'll go ahead and wrap this up real quick before I put on the tire or rim or whatever. But as you can see, new pads look great. A little gap there so it can roll. Once you step on the brakes a few times, they'll adjust. So those are installed. Everything is back. I'm good to go. So thank you for watching.